Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to H2O. My name is Caleb. I'm one of the pastors here. And as a church, we've been working through the book of Genesis, and that's what we've been doing the past 3 summers now, as we've been slowly walking through the book of Genesis and seeing how God has worked through all these different people and these different families in the book of Genesis. And one of the things that we're going to see today is the legacy of the family of Abraham and his son Isaac. And when I think about leaving a legacy, I think of the movie Gladiator, okay? So I don't know if you've seen Gladiator, but it's a great movie. Ridley Scott directed it. Russell Crowe's the star, okay? Great movie. You should watch it if you haven't watched it. But one of the things that really stands out to me is the opening scene. So Russell Crowe and all his guys are getting lined up to go to battle. Russell Crowe is this Roman general, and he's trying to get everybody pumped up, okay? Because you're about to go to war with some guys, so you need the adrenaline, you need the testosterone to be flowing, okay? And so what he does is he gives this speech, okay? Really famous speech that leads up to this big battle that's about to happen. And so as he's asking these guys to risk their lives for him, one of the things that he says is what we do in life echoes for eternity. Okay, what we do in life echoes in eternity. And so this is something that's always stuck with me from that movie. Okay, it's one of those iconic lines which are like, man, I have to think about that. I have to process what he's talking about. And really what he's saying here is what you do here and now has a lasting impact, whether you realize it or not. You may not see the impact of this battle that we're about to go in. You may die in this battle, but it has an impact. What you're doing right now matters. Okay, that is what he's saying to these guys who are about to go to battle for him. And today what we're going to see is the legacy of this guy named Isaac. All right, Isaac doesn't get a lot of screen time in the Bible, okay? Very, very little is talked about Isaac, okay? He's referenced many times, okay? Over 20 times in the Old Testament, Isaac's relationship with God is mentioned. But it really doesn't give you a lot of details about his life, okay? He's mentioned many times, but very, very few details about the actions of Isaac are provided for us, aside from our passage today. What we have today is really some of the lasting things we know about Isaac and that will be remembered about him. So we had a brief blurb about him last week where he prayed and he asked for children and then God gave them to him, and we'll see a little bit of a blurb more next week. But really today is the impact that Isaac had. What we see about his life is in our text for today. So we're going to ask, what is his legacy that has been passed down to us? So we'll be in Genesis chapter 26. And so that'll come up on the screens, or if you want to use one of the Bibles provided for you, it's on page 19 or 20. So 19 or 20 if you're flipping there in those Bibles. So we're in Genesis chapter 26, and we will start in verse 1. All right, and it says, "Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, 'Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in the land, and I will be with you, and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands. And I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws.' So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of this place asked him about his wife, he said, 'She is my sister,' for he feared to say, 'my wife,' thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, 'Behold, she is your wife. How could you say, she is my sister?' Isaac said to him, 'Because I thought lest I die because of her.' And Abimelech said, 'What is this that you have done to us? One of the people might have easily lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us.' So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." And we'll pause there. So probably not an average story that you're reading these days, okay? There's some weird things that happen. There's some cool things that happen here. And what we see initially is that there's a famine. So times are really hard for Isaac and his family here. They're not able to eat what they normally would, and his livestock has probably died. So he inherited all this livestock from Abraham, and probably much of it has died at this point. So he has to go travel to a foreign country, essentially, and try and find means to which to provide for his family. And so he's headed towards this place called Gerar, which is ruled by a guy named Abimelech. And so Abimelech is probably not a proper name, but a title. It literally means son of the king. And so my stance would be that it is just like Pharaoh or king or something like that, which represents a person, but not necessarily a proper name. The other possibility is it's like King Henry, right? There's 8 King Henrys, and so it's that type of thing. So, a family type of name is the other possibility. So we have Abimelech, and then it's also talking about the land of the Philistines. Okay, and if you read to the right of this section in your Old Testament, you will see the Philistines come up over and over again, and these people are enemies of Israel, God's chosen people. And so I think one of the reasons the Philistines is mentioned here is to let the reader know, hey, this is a dangerous area you're entering into. You're not entering into friendly territory. You're walking into the area of your enemies. So Isaac should be careful, and maybe that's why he's doing this lying here. So Isaac is getting ready to enter Gerar, and then God appears to him. And I want to highlight 3 very important things that God says to Isaac. So when he's talking with God, 3 things that he says. 1, he says, don't go to Egypt. Okay, it seems pretty straightforward. Don't do it. Don't go there. And why is he saying don't go to Egypt? Because that's what Abraham did. Remember in the beginning it said, don't, like the former famine of Abraham. And so he's saying, don't do what your dad did, but stay in the land that I tell you to go to. And so Isaac does this, right? Number 2, God promises to bless Isaac, right? He says, I will give you the land. I will give you offspring, right? These things that he had promised to Abraham. He says, Isaac, you'll be a blessing to the nations. He reaffirms the promises being passed down from Abraham are now on to Isaac, carrying on the legacy of his father. And then 3rd, I want to point out that God says he will be with Isaac, okay? This is a little bit different terminology, a different emphasis than traditionally Abraham's promises have focused on. Isaac here is to say, okay, as I go into the dangerous place, as I go through this hard time in my life, God is with me. That's what he's supposed to remember, that as Isaac is on this journey, God is right there next to him the whole way. And so we hear these beautiful things from God, these promises that Isaac can cling to. And then something interesting comes up in verse 5 that may have made some of us feel a little uncomfortable. And it says that because Abraham obeyed God, that this blessing is passed down. Okay, that might make us feel a little uncomfortable. We might be like, okay, well, I thought we were saved by faith and that these blessings are a result of faith and the relationship with God and things like that. That might be, well, how do we reconcile those 2 things? And what I think is being said here is that Abraham acted on his faith. That's what I think is being said here, that because he had faith, he then lived it out, because real faith results in action, right? Because Abraham was willing to give up Isaac, his most prized thing in his life, his son that the promise was supposed to come through. And so Isaac was willing to give that up for God. And so this demonstrates his faith, his willingness to put God before everything else in his life. And I think it could be helpful for us to have a New Testament example of using similar terminology to mean this. And I think a good New Testament example is a story called Jesus Heals the Paralytic. Okay, so here's my summary, my cliff notes, if you will, of this story. All right, it's not perfect, but it's what I got. So in this story, we have a guy who can't walk. Okay, paralytic, he can't walk. And so he hears Jesus is going to come to town. He's going to be teaching. He's going to be healing people. And he says, man, if I could just go see Jesus, then I can be healed, right? If I could get my friends to carry me and do this. And so he gets a bunch of his friends to pick him up, carry him to where Jesus is. And then you're like, oh, great, the problem's solved. But when he gets there, he can't get in the door because it's wall-to-wall people. Okay, Jesus is a pretty famous guy. Don't know if you've heard of him. But, he is not able to get in. And so the solution that they have is, okay, we're going to climb on the roof, bring him up the roof, and then we're going to tear down the roof so that way we can lower him in, right? And so then Jesus sees them breaking through the roof, probably a shocking thing to see, and he says to this guy, your sins are forgiven, okay? But I thought this guy was supposed to be healed, right? And so what do we do with that, right? What is he saying? How can Jesus say this, right? Well, he can say it because this man lived out his faith. He trusted in Jesus. He trusted him enough to say, I'm going to get a bunch of my friends to go carry me a long ways and then try and break through a roof to try and see Jesus, right? He trusted in Jesus. He lived out his faith, and that is an example of it. And so just like Abraham here was willing to give up everything for God, so this man who was crippled was willing to give up everything to see Jesus. He trusted in Jesus and what he was able to do. And that's what I think we see with Abraham here, that Abraham was willing to do anything it takes to follow God at the end of his life. Not a perfect man by any means. We saw many examples of that last summer. So if you're interested, you can watch those sermons on the YouTube channel. But Abraham made his mistakes. But what we see is that ultimately at the end of the day, he had faith. And that's what God is rewarding here. And so God finishes speaking to Isaac. We see affirmation of Abraham's faith. And then we see Isaac tell an interesting lie, okay? He says that his wife is his sister, okay? Kind of a weird thing to say in our day, right? She was his cousin. That would have been truthful, so that's also a little weird. But, it's just the culture is a little different, right? So it's very normal to marry your cousin in that day. Some places still today that's normal. And I'm not going to say any more about that. So don't want to get in trouble. And so he marries his cousin, but he lies and says it's his sister. And, for us, that could be really hard to imagine what world we would be in where we'd say something like that, because it's pretty weird, okay? And so to just maybe place you in the context a little bit more, not to justify his lying, because that's obviously wrong, but what he is trying to do, I think, is maintain some control and protection of her without being killed. So he's trying to have his cake and eat it too, as they say. He is trying to say, okay, he is the head of the household here, so he could deny marriages of his sister. And so I think he's trying to be like, I can protect her, but also I can do this so I don't get killed. Okay, wrong. Shouldn't do it. But I think that's what he's trying to say here, to kind of put ourselves in his shoes in a sense, to try and understand where he's coming from. And he tells this lie, but the problem is Abimelech's not an idiot, okay? He's a smart guy. He's a nice guy. He's a gracious guy. And he finds out that Rebekah and Isaac are flirting, okay? So they apparently have a good marriage. They love each other. It's going great, and they're flirting, okay? And he sees this, and he basically goes to Isaac and says, do you think I'm an idiot because I can see through what's going on here? And he reads between the lines, and he calls him out on it. And Isaac comes clean and says, I was scared that you were going to kill me. And Abimelech calls him out, and it's okay. But the interesting thing is that despite that Isaac sins, he messes up, he doesn't do what he should have done in the situation, God still blesses him, right? God gives him mercy in this situation because Abimelech protects him, which is a really weird thing to do. Abimelech was very, very gracious here and says, you know what, I'm going to protect you. Nobody can touch you, essentially. And so God blesses Isaac, even though he doesn't deserve it in this situation. He is sinning, he's messing up, but God is gracious here in this passage. But let's see what happens after Abimelech protects them in verse 12. And it says, and Isaac showed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that, so he called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. And so he called its name Rehoboth, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." And we'll stop there for a moment. So we see Isaac's blessings continue, okay? So not only is he protected by this foreign ruler, but also now his crop yield is crazy. This is a miraculous thing. It's not just that he's really smart and knows, oh, I'm going to do crop rotation and do all these different techniques to grow more plants, okay? No, that's not what's happening. God is miraculously providing for him and causing these crazy crop yields to grow. And as a result of this, Isaac basically becomes one of the richest guys in town. And Abimelech gives him this backhanded compliment. He basically says, "You're too good for us here, so go get out," right? It's a little weird thing to say. But he says, get out because you're doing so well. They're jealous of his success. And so Isaac then has to move, out to the suburbs. And then there's this controversy of these different wells and these locations that Abraham, Isaac's dad, had, right? That they were probably rightfully Isaac's in these situations. But Isaac doesn't fight them. He just decides to move on to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one, until finally there is no controversy over these wells. And the final well literally means open spaces. So it's this open area that God has provided where there's not controversy over the wells. So God is continuing to bless Isaac as he goes. And we see Isaac trusting God to provide this water for him, okay? If he doesn't get this water, he is surely going to die out here in the desert, right? So if he doesn't have this water, he will die, but he trusts that God will provide as he goes from well to well, and he doesn't try to fight back. He just accepts that God will provide as he goes. So we see Isaac growing in his faith, trusting God more and more as time goes on. And then let's see what happens when we pick up in verse 23. And it says, "From there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, 'I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and will bless you, and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake.' So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. When Abimelech went to him from Gerar with Ahuzath, his advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his army, Isaac said to them, 'Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me, and have sent me away from you?' And they said, 'We see plainly that the Lord has been with you.' So we said, 'Let there be a sworn pact between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord.' So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they rose early and exchanged oaths, and Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, 'We have found water.' He called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah." And that is the end of our text for today. And so, here towards the beginning, we see that God is reminding Isaac of these blessings from the beginning of the passage, right? Isaac is about to enter into a difficult portion. And so as Abimelech and his advisors are coming to him, clearly Isaac doesn't think this is going to be a good situation. Isaac probably thinks, these guys are going to kill me. They're going to kick me out even further. I just got a well. What's going on, right? And so that's what he's thinking. So God knew that this difficult situation was going to come up for him. And so he reminded him of the promises that he could cling to in this difficult moment. And I think what we see here is Isaac trusting God in this difficulty and saying, okay, I know Abimelech and his advisors are here and they're going to maybe try to get me to leave, but I'm going to stand firm in what is going to happen here, right? He basically says, I know you guys are mistreating me and all this type of stuff, but I am going to stand firm. And he trusts that God will do whatever he's going to do in this situation. And so he trusts God's provision for him in this moment. And what we see is that there is a peace treaty as a result. So Isaac may have thought, oh, this is going to get violent. This is going to be basically a battle that's going to happen. But God provides. And God provides so much for Isaac here that these guys, Abimelech and his advisors, see it. And they're like, we know God is with you. We know that his hand is over you and causing this success. That there is so much blessing happening. No matter where Isaac goes or the situation, God's hand is on him. And they see that and they acknowledge that. And they say, we don't want to mess with you. And I think the funniest thing here is Abimelech, the king of the place, is worried about Isaac, right? Because he's afraid of him. It should be the other way around. Isaac should be scared of him, and he kind of is. But Abimelech knows that God is with him, and so he is afraid. He is saying, I'm not going to mess with you because God is with you. And so we see God's protection and his provision over Isaac here. And it ends positively and peacefully in regards to Abimelech and Isaac. But then there's this interesting almost PS statement, okay, with Esau. So why is Esau mentioned here? It seems strange. It seems out of place. But why would the author say, okay, we should talk about Esau here? What could be the purpose of that? And I think what he's doing here is he's contrasting Isaac and Esau. What do we know about Isaac? That he's shown to have faith. He trusts God. Not perfect, okay? He had a weird lie back in the beginning of this passage, right? But he overall has a pattern of trusting God in his life. But what we see about Esau here is that he marries these Hittite women and he has multiple marriages, okay? Isaac is one of the only guys who only marries one woman between Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, those guys. He only marries one wife. And when he can't have kids, what does he do? He prays to God to provide a child for him. And then God provides it for him. And so Isaac trusted God in that area of his life. But what we see with Esau here is he's taking matters into his own hands, okay? He is marrying these women who will make him go after other gods and worship them over the one true God, and also marrying multiple women, okay? Something that he shouldn't do, and we see the negative consequences of later on in Genesis, okay? And so what we have here is a contrast of Isaac, who is trusting God, not a perfect guy, but trusts God, and Esau, the guy that pursues his own way rather than God's ways. And this is this contrast of the two. So Isaac's legacy is faith and trusting God, and Esau's legacy is going his own way, trusting his own knowledge and his own desires over anything else. And that is why I think Esau is included here. So if this is God's word, what do we do with Genesis 26? Okay, what is the use for us today in our context of living out this interesting story of faith that has some weird parts about it? What do we do with it? Because we know, based off of Timothy, the letter to Timothy, that all Scripture is profitable. So what is the thing for us that we can take away? And I think the first and most important thing about this passage that we should realize is that when we walk in faith, God is with us. When we walk in faith, God is with us. And we see this in 3 places in this passage. Right? Verse 3, sojourn for I am with you. That's what God says to Isaac. You're going to go into a foreign land and it's going to be hard, but I am right there by your side. Verse 24, fear not, for I am with you. Don't be scared of the foreign enemies that might come and try to take things from you, but I am right there beside you. And then finally, in verse 38, we see plainly the Lord has been with you. The Abimelech and his guys see the hand of God on him. They know that God is with him. And Isaac, again, is not perfect, but he has a pattern of trusting God. He doesn't make the mistakes of Abraham going down to Egypt. He listens to God's assignment as far as where he's to go. Okay? He doesn't have multiple wives. He trusts God's plan for his family. He trusts God to provide for him when he's forced out of Gerar. And he praises God when things go good for him by building the altar. And so we see overall the legacy that Isaac has left is trusting God, whether good or bad times. He trusts that God is always with him. Now we may be thinking, okay, maybe the promises are a little bit different between us and Isaac here. Maybe, you've studied your theology and you say, okay, well, there's a covenantal difference between the two of us, and you'd be correct, okay? But the good news is we have a very similar promise from Jesus, okay? What does he say in Matthew 28:20? He says, I am with you to the end of the age. We know too that God is with us, that if we have faith in Jesus, who was truly God, truly man, come down and made a sacrifice for us, rose again on the third day, and then ascended to the right hand of the Father, that if we have faith in that, then we have Jesus with us always. We too have a promise of God that he is with us no matter what is going on. And something to think about here too is Isaac, what he has to go off of here is he only has whatever Abraham taught him and his personal experience with God. Okay? We have the beauty of seeing all the Old Testament, all the New Testament, and the sacrifice that Jesus made for us, and we can lean on all of those things, whereas Isaac had way, way less to trust God on, okay? So Isaac is a great example of faith. He didn't have all this benefit that we have, seeing Jesus make this sacrifice for us, but we can cling to that and those promises. We are a little bit spoiled in that. And so as we go out of here today, we need to trust that God is with us, because some of us are here and we're having a tough time. Things are hard in our lives, right? Some of us are in that place where Isaac is at, where he's going into a foreign country. There's a famine in the land, and things are hard for Isaac. And things may be hard for us too with whatever's going on in our lives. But we can know that God is with us, that Jesus is with us in those difficulties, in those challenges in our life. He is right there with us because of our faith in him. But maybe things are going really good. Your career's going great, relationships going great, everything's fine in your life. But in those times too, we need to remember that God is with us in those. And we see Isaac do this. He's a great example. What does he do? He builds the altar and he worships God. And we can't forget in the good times as well as the bad that God is with us. Sometimes there's that temptation of like, man, things are really hard right now, so I need to pray. And that could be good, right? But that shouldn't be the only time that we are bringing things to God and realizing that he's with us, also in the good times as well. So remember that when we walk in faith, God is with us. Second, we too can be a source of blessing for the nations, okay? So we know that Abraham led to Isaac, which eventually led to the nation of Israel, which was supposed to be this wonderful blessing to all the nations around them. They were supposed to be an example of the wisdom of God. But we know the reality is, if you read the Old Testament, most of the time they didn't live up to those expectations, okay? Most of the time they were like, oh, we're going to go worship these other gods. We're going to go do these things and pursue what we want. That's a majority of what Israel does. They don't live up to their end of what their expectations are supposed to be. But what we do know this side of the cross is that we are the ultimate fulfillment of being a blessing to the nations. That as a result of what Jesus has done, we are to go make disciples of all nations and bless them with the beautiful gift of the gospel. And so this happens when we share the gospel here in Athens, right? Okay, we are the nations in a sense, right? Because the nations are anywhere outside of Israel. And so in a sense, when you share the gospel here in Athens, Ohio, you are sharing the gospel with the nations. Sometimes we only think internationally when we think about the nations, but this is a promise for you and the people around you as well. But I don't want to forget about things internationally either, okay? Because we have a beautiful opportunity to reach other nations here in Athens, because we live in a college town. So there's many, many international students here who need the gospel, who need to have faith in Jesus because they're currently under condemnation. And so they need Jesus to be in that right relationship with God. And so we have lots of opportunities here to share the gospel with them, whether it's something really practically like partnering with IFI and seeing how you can practically serve different international students, or talking with Lee about how maybe you can partner and help share the gospel with other international students. That would be a great way to do this and live this out, and remember that ultimately it's through us, the church, that the nations are blessed, and we see the result of this. And so there's all sorts of ways we can be a blessing for the nation as well by sharing the gospel with them. So finally, we must pass down our faith to the next generation. We have that legacy piece. We need to leave a legacy for the next generation, right? We see that Abraham, then it's passed down to Isaac, and we see the example that Abraham sets of faith for Isaac. And then Isaac sets an example of faith. Again, neither of them are perfect. But we see this passing of the torch at the beginning of the chapter, that his faith is then passed down on to Isaac, okay? We need to pass our faith down to the next generation, okay? And we'll see next week kind of what does that look like practically with Esau and Jacob, okay? Maybe not the perfect example, but we are to pass down our faith to the next generation. We want to leave a legacy like Isaac does of trusting God. We talked about all those examples of where Isaac trusts God in his life, okay? Again, not perfect, but he trusts God. And so obviously we can't just force children and people of the next generation to say, you're going to believe in Jesus, okay? You're going to do it, right? We can't do that. That doesn't work. But we should be faithful if you have children to then, share your faith with them and teach them about Jesus, right? And whether it's something really practically like, a kid takes their toy away and you tell them, oh, you need to forgive them for that, right? And why do we forgive? Because Jesus forgave us. And you can start the example from a young age, teaching your children about God and who he is and our relationship with him. But many of us probably don't have children at this stage in our lives. And for us, this is something that we really emphasize as a church, reaching the next generation, right? We're in a college town on purpose. We want to reach college students, okay? We want to share the legacy of faith. We want to share what God has done in our lives, like we see the legacy of what God has done in Isaac's life in this passage, okay? And we want to be very intentional to share with the next generation what God has done and their need for God, that if they are not in Christ, then they're separated from God for eternity, right? And so there's this urgency that we have to share with the next generation that who Jesus is and their need for them. And so we want to share with them. We want to be intentional. And this isn't something just for our staff team or the pastors. We want everybody to be involved in this together. We want you, if you're a member of the community, to be a part of reaching college students, discipling them, pouring into them. Here's what I've learned. Don't make the same mistakes that I've done, okay? That's half the meetings that I have with students is, I made this mistake. Don't do it, okay? That's just real life. And so, we want you to be a part of that too. If you're a follower of Christ, we want you to be involved in that. And then if you're a student, you should be a part of this too. You could probably be more effective than any of us because people might be like, man, that Caleb guy's old, It's a little weird that he's here, okay? So you could probably be even more effective by reaching other students than I could, okay? And so we want you to be involved with that. But also, if you're a student here, I want to remind you that people have been praying for you for years, okay? People have been praying for this church for years to come down here in our network. And they're praying for you so that way you would either come to know Jesus or that your faith would be strengthened as you're here. And our prayer is that we would send you out as strong followers of Jesus wherever you go when you graduate. So we care about you and we're glad that you are here. So we are a church that wants to love God and love Athens and reach the next generation. And so as we go out of here, I want us to remember that when we walk in faith, God is with us. God is with us whether good times or bad, wherever we're at in our life. Remember, too, that we can be a blessing to the nations. We can share our faith in what Jesus has done for them. And finally, we want to be a church that reaches the next generation, that leaves a legacy of faith where we can see where we have trusted God and pass that down to the generations that follow us. So let's pray. God, we thank you for the example of Isaac, who has trusted you, that he may not be perfect, just like we're not perfect, but that he has this pattern in his life of trusting you for his family, for physically providing for him, and all these different things. We're thankful for that example and how it's been set for us. God, I pray that we would trust that you are with us, whether we're in a really tough time in our life and things seem bad, that we would trust you, that you are with us and that you can give us peace like no person ever could, God. And I just pray that we would bring that to you, that we'd also bring that to community and pray for one another and be in those tough times with one another and with you, Lord. And I pray that we would be a light to the nations, that we would see people from other countries and from Athens here come to know you, that people would place their faith in you and trust that you are the only way to a right relationship with God. And finally, I pray that we would be a church that passes down a legacy to the next generation, that people would say, oh man, I've seen, how these people have passed down what you've done or what God's done in these people's lives down to the next generation and how they've loved them well, Lord. So we just pray all these things that, we would really try to live out your word today and the rest of this week and the rest of our lives, Lord. So we just pray this to you, God. Amen.